Welcome to Preparing for AI, the AI podcast for everybody, with your hosts Jimmy Rhodes and me, Matt Cartwright. We explore the human and social impacts of AI, looking at the impact on jobs, AI and sustainability, and most importantly, the urgent need for safe development of AI, governance and alignment. Ground control to Major Tom. Take your protein pills and put your helmet on. Welcome to Preparing for AI, the emergency episode with me, Dickie Greenleaf.
And me, Tom Ripley.
So it is our second or third emergency episode. We thought that we would do this because this week has been a massive week in AI in terms of kind of geopolitics and kind of global impact. And obviously we've had recently episodes where we've been looking at focusing in on developments in China and AI in China and AI apps and US versus China and all of that kind of that side of it. And then we've had probably definitely two kind of major developments this week. One on the kind of US side and the other on the China side. And we're going to kind of bring those two stories together, how they have just kind of shown us two completely different approaches to the kind of current way to, say, solve the problem of getting to sort of artificial general intelligence, and also the kind of ramifications and how this is really going to kind of reverberate across sort of US China development of AI, but also how AI is kind of brought forward in the next few weeks, months and years, I guess. So Jimmy, I think we're going to start off with DeepSeek, which is the new open source model in China. So I'll hand over to you and you can introduce our listeners.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Sorry, who were you? You're not Matt, are you?
I'm Dickie Greenleaf and you're Tom
Dickie
Ripley.
Greenleaf, that's it. Sorry, hi, thank you, Dickie. So I'm really excited about this because if you listen to the podcast, I've always been pro open source. This has come from a bit of a weird place because weird place. It's not that weird. It's China where we live. But it's come a bit, I think, from a bit left field in terms of no one expected it. It was completely out of the blue, and just the level of ability of this open source model, which I'm going to explain in a little bit. So this is just in terms of like where this has come from. So basically there's as far as I understand it, there's an investment company in China that are working on AI models for investing. They're a quant company, quant investing. I think if you watch They Are Billions, you'll understand that. Or is it billions? I can't remember. Anyway, yeah. But they, as a side project, apparently, they had this thing called DeepSeek, which is a large language model approach. And they call it DeepSeek R1. I think there was a previous version. But what they've done is they've just released it. They've made it completely open source, completely open weights, and it's blown the competition out of the water last week. I'm going to get a little bit technical here. I think we're going to put the link to the paper in the show notes, which is even more technical. But what I recommend, if you want to sort of read up on it, if you want to see some of the charts, see some of the information, it's super interesting. You can go and read the paper. You can stick the paper into another AI like Claude and get a bit of a summary of it. There's also tons of YouTube videos that go into loads of detail by, people like Matt Berman and Sam Wittenstein, I think. Again, we'll stick links in the show notes, who do some really good videos explaining it in a lot more detail than I'm going to. But effectively, they've released this new model. They initially did something called DeepSeek R10, which was trained using reinforcement learning and no supervised data. Naturally developed complex reasoning using reinforcement learning. And then what they've done is they've enhanced that by building something called DeepSeek R1 on top of that, as far as I understand it, where they've added a bit more initial supervised data, and they've done large-scale reinforcement learning. Now, if you have a look at all this online, you can have a look at the sort of like detail of it, like I say. As far as I understand it, kind of just translating it as much as I can, what they've done is first of all they've taken humans out of the loop completely, and they've created thinking reasoning models similar to what GPT's top models are. So GPT, if you pay $20 a month, I think you get access to O1 preview. If you pay $200 a month, a crazy amount of money for enterprise grade stuff, you get their top model, which I think is O1, the actual model. What this DeepSeek R1 does is it does a lot of similar things, but they've also kind of come up with a whole bunch of new ways of training these models, which are, some of them are novel, some of them are completely novel. And in terms of the outcomes, just to go into a little bit of detail, this model, DeepSeek R1, open source model, the full version of it, which you can access online. You can download the app as well. It is a Chinese model, so it has Chinese censorship in it, which is a bit weird. But as they've made it open source, in the future, in the very near future, it's going to get fine-tuned and refined on sites like Hugging Face so that you can download versions of it that are basically don't have that censorship in them. But that aside, it achieves as good or better than the top closed source models on a lot of these benchmarks that are used online for grading and rating large language models, which is an incredible achievement. So just to repeat that, compared to GPT-4, compared to every single model that OpenAI have, apart from their very, very top model, and it's very close to them as well, this open source model that's released completely for free on the internet performs better. And not only that, I think it's something like 30 times cheaper. It costs 5 to 10% of the actual cost of a query on GPT-4 and GPT-01, that kind of thing. To give a couple of numbers, a couple of examples in the paper that we're going to link, it achieves 79.8% in something called AIM 2024. OpenAI GPT-4 gets 79.2%, or that might even be O1, I'm not sure. On something called Math 500, which is math performance, it gets 97.3%, which is actually slightly better than OpenAI at 96.4%. It's in the 96.3 percentile on Codeforce, so it can code really well. Even more incredibly, so people won't understand what the different sizes of models are, but just to put this in context, so they've got a 7 billion parameter model that outperforms GPT-4 on math tasks. So one of the most significant things is so the top model is like this big 300 billion parameter model that you can run in the cloud. It takes a lot of resources still, but still a fraction of GPT. They've also created these smaller models. So there's a 7 billion parameter model. I've got that downloaded on my laptop. I can run that locally on my laptop, and it outperforms GPT-4 on math tasks. So in specific domains, they've managed to distill other models or distill their model into smaller models that are targeted at specific domains like coding, math, things like that. And you can run a model on your laptop genuinely that outperforms GPT-4 on specific tasks. And you can get different versions of the model that can outperform GPT-4 on other tasks. So this is super, super interesting, and it massively democratizes like advanced reasoning via these models. Now, I've tried it out. So one of the things, I tried out DeepSeek online a little like the other day in the last few days, and I tried it with some maths tests. So I basically got it to multiply big numbers together and then divide. I think I got it to multiply two 5-digit numbers and divide them by pi. These are things that typically in the past large language models couldn't do. And the most interesting part of this, so first of all, it got the answer right to 4 decimal places or something like that. The most interesting part was like the reasoning, and it shows, if you try DeepSeek out, it shows you its thinking steps. And what it actually does is it basically takes itself through the process of doing long multiplication and then long division, much like a human would, right? Because it's reasoning it out. When I gave it these 2 big numbers and the pi thing, it did tons of reasoning. It probably reasoned for about a minute, and you could read all of it. And the thing I found super interesting about that, apart from the fact that it got the answer right using this method, is it was very human, but also you could use it to teach yourself. It basically takes you through the logic of how to think about a problem. And it's super, super interesting. I recommend people try it. As I say, like insane performance. Like I've genuinely tried this myself. I downloaded the 1.5 billion parameter model for coding. and I did coding tasks using it. So a typical example is that you get these models to make a snake game or something like that. This is something that's quite easily repeatable. And if you look at the history of large language models, you can look over the last year at how much better and better large language models have got at this. This 1.5 billion parameter model, which runs on my laptop, could run on a phone, because I've run 1 billion parameter models on my phone using something called Pocket Pal. It did it perfectly. It first time round, it created this snake game that was actually quite advanced, better than stuff like GP3 would have done back in the day. And so my overall point with this is like, they've produced this incredible open source model that outperforms like the biggest closed source models that we have right now. It's a huge threat to like companies like Google, Meta, OpenAI, all these, Microsoft, all these companies. I see this as a huge threat to them, because you've got these companies that Meta aside, because they're releasing open source models, but companies like OpenAI, they're trying to build a moat around what they're doing. They're doing everything closed source behind closed doors. DeepSeek have just thrown this all out in the open and blown that away. I think there's an argument that the reason some of this has happened, I mean, the crazy thing is it's a side project. I think there's an argument that the reason some of this has happened is because the US has put sanctions on China and not allowed them to have access to chips. And this is something we're going to talk about more, but they've kind of forced them in this direction where they've actually had to innovate. Typically something that would have, come from the West, actually, I think, is in my opinion, where like, maybe we've kind of forced China to actually do this innovation because we've denied them access to, brute forcing things. I'll let you come in there, Matt. Sorry. Have you got any questions about that?
No, I thought it was funny that you were saying we, but don't forget you're in China, Jimmy. So you mean they?
Well, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I know. No, we're trying to make this a kind of short emergency episode. We could probably talk for an hour just on this one subject. I mean, there's so much unknown at the moment. I think there are a lot of questions. The sort of conspiracy theorist in me, which is, as you know, quite a lot of me, sort of does think, well, this has been thrown out, on the week of Trump's inauguration, just after something we're going to talk about in a minute, which is, Stargate and 600 billion thrown into these huge data centers. There's something that smacks a little bit to me of there are coincidences, and then there are things which are, don't seem like coincidences. And I just, there are a lot of questions there. I mean, I think, one of the most interesting things.
Just to clarify on one point, sorry to jump in. DeepSeek was released the week before Stargate came out.
But DeepSeek R1 came out after that, didn't it?
I'd have to double check. I think the DeepSeek R1 paper is dated before the announcement, but it's all happened around the same time, right?
Okay, sure. I mean, there are loads of really fascinating things. I think one of the most interesting things with this is the fact that this isn't so. Different people have this kind of view on China of, well, everything is the Communist Party and everything belongs to the state. And while that's not strictly true, of course, there is, they would be able to leverage their interests if they wanted to, in the same way as, the US government and Silicon Valley work together. But what's really interesting, like you say, is this is not one of those big, tech giants that's working hand in hand with the Ministry of State Security on development of models. This is, like you say, almost kind of like a startup. I mean, it's not a startup because it's a sort of like you say, it's basically like a hedge fund. There's a lot of money invested here, but this is a side project. And I think, was it $5.15 million was all it cost to train this, which, in terms of training a model is literally sort of pocket change. And the number of GPUs they used is absolutely tiny. There's a really great article that I've got it open at the moment, and there's a bit here about sort of OpenAI. So it's gone on to talk about OpenAI, and it says, I'm just going to read it. Perhaps OpenAI have concealed O1's chain of thought, not just for competitive reasons, but because they arrived at a dark realization. It would be unsettling for us to witness an AI leap from English to other languages mid-sentence, then to symbols, and finally to what seems like gibberish, only to land on the correct answers. How the hell has that happened? How did you find that answer? I don't understand anything about it. Believe me, you don't want to look directly into the mind of an entity beyond yourself. You don't want to shock yourself to death. I'm feeling shivers down my spine. So that is by an article from Alberto Romero. He runs a Substack called The Algorithmic Bridge, which I've only read a couple of articles, but is like really fantastic stuff. I think that's, I know you said you can see the reasoning in English, but I'm going to go on in a minute to talk about some sort of hypothesis out there about the models that really kind of exist behind the scenes. But when you see the reasoning, does it continue in human language, or is it possible that it is, it's going into some other language and that is allowing it to kind of skip ahead in this way?
Yeah. So, I mean, you raised something interesting. So on the video by Sam I think it's Sam Wittenstein. I need to get his name right. We get everyone's names right, don't we? But we will link him in the show notes. He actually talks, so I haven't had this experience. I was going to experiment more. Apparently he's had the experience when he's been playing around with DeepSeek where he's asked it a question in English. The reasoning's all in Chinese, but then it comes out with the answer in English. And actually, I think in another situation where he's asking a question, maybe it related to something in Spain, the model did the reasoning in Spanish and then came out with the answer in English. So it's like actually demonstrates perfectly what you're talking about. And who knows in the future, like you say, I mean, DeepSeek do expose the reasoning, which I find super interesting. But you're right. And also, are these models doing other stuff even in the background? Like, at what point do they start being duplicitous, that kind of thing? Yeah, totally agree.
So, yeah, I don't want to go on yet to talking about the sort of O1 and this kind of hypothesis behind models, because I think we should stick with DeepSeek. The thing that I wanted to, I guess, to kind of ask you to explain to people, because I think a lot of people, listening will not necessarily understand, is this kind of advance that we've seen. So what does that mean in terms of, people will hear the words AGI, artificial general intelligence, ASI, artificial superintelligence. What does this mean in terms of our kind of journey towards these steps? Is this it? Is this now, we've got this model now and, this is the moment. We're at the singularity or whatever. Or is this just someone's happened upon a breakthrough and now everyone's going to try and replicate it, but who knows whether this is as far as it takes us? I mean, what does this mean in the kind of wider scheme of things with the development of frontier models?
I think you've got to look at it. Well, first of all, you've got to look at it as a bit of a paradigm shift. Like, I don't know, they've open sourced all this, so loads of people are going to copy this now. I still think that, obviously, I mean, we haven't really elaborated on what Stargate is, but Stargate is like pumping billions, hundreds of billions, potentially up to $500 billion into building massive data centers for training and processing inference, like training AIs and processing inference. And just to go back to something you were talking about before, the numbers that were being chucked around last year by Sam Altman were that the next model is going to take 1 billion, then it'll be 10 billion to train the model. And we've just seen like a model that costs 5 million to train, and is outperforming like the current generation of models. So I think you're going to see lots of like OpenAI can just copy this, and then they can make a closed source version of the same
that was
thing,
going to be
with some improvements, right?
That was going to be my next question. By putting it out there, is if this is an advance that they wanted to kind of lock in and commercialize, well, they've put it out there. Presumably all of the big frontier model developers now will be, reverse engineering this, and if it is that good, they'll just be using it anyway. So it feels a kind of bizarre thing, and that's why I say the conspiracy theories to me, the timing of it. If it was really this big breakthrough, would China allow them to do this? And even though I said, they're not caught with the state, they're still here. I mean, they're going to be patriotic. They're not going to throw something out there if there's a geopolitical, AI war for the future of civilization and just throw it out for people to use it. There are so many kind of unanswered questions to me here that I almost wonder if it's like, are they just throwing us a bone, but actually they've got something even better in the background?
Maybe it's a shot across the bow to scare us. Maybe it's just to massively undermine like all these other AI companies. Because to be honest, like Meta have been doing that, right? Meta are saying,
yeah,
here you go. Here's
Llama
free
models are all
models.
free, yeah.
Yeah, which are also very powerful, like very, very good actually. And so I think there's a certain aspect of that. Like I do think it massively undercuts companies like OpenAI, and it's like, how far behind are open source companies? It seems like in some aspects they're even ahead, or certainly like right at the forefront of what's going on. So I think it does put a massive question around OpenAI. Now I think the investment the US is putting into things is kind of going in the wrong direction, or it's misguided. I don't. I think ultimately OpenAI. At one point I said they won't exist in a few years' time. I kind of want to go back on that, because they're getting so much money chucked at them, and they seem to have so much clout. They seem to have SoftBank and the US government behind them now, like effectively, like much like the banks. Even if they're not really doing anything, or not doing anything,
They can't be left to fail, can they? Yeah,
they're not going to be left to fail. Yeah, and I feel like they're in that situation now. They're kind of like
they're almost a symbol of the US now. They like all companies like Boeing can't be left to fail because of what they represent, and Saudi Aramco. It's almost like OpenAI is becoming like that. You can't let them fail, because they are seen as USAI. They're not seen as a non-profit or whatever capped profit organization, are they? I just want to bring you back, because my sort of question on where does it take us in terms of AGI and ASI. I mean, again, just to redefine artificial general intelligence, artificial superintelligence may not actually be very well defined, which is part of the problem. But does this mean something in that journey, or is this just, we kind of take this standalone and it may or may not mean we're actually any further along in terms of that development? Because my understanding of this really is, what's so amazing is it makes things so much cheaper and so much more efficient. But it doesn't actually mean that we haven't seen an advance that's taken us beyond what ChatGPT did, OpenAI did with GPT-01. What we've seen is something that is basically an equivalent that is much cheaper, much more efficient, and that has been democratized.
Yeah. Okay. So to go back to that, I think with the amount of money being chucked at AI, if this one costs 5 million, then like in my head, you can just say, okay, let's chuck more training data and put more parameters into a model that uses this same architecture and create something even better, which is what we're starting to talk about. So I think you will see this will result in a massive increase in the intelligence, I'm doing air quotes here, of models. However, I'm going to double down on what we've said before, which is I think we're developing models that are approaching 100% of human capability. And now, if a lot of the definitions of AGI by a lot of people at the moment seem to be models that can basically do things as well as humans can. And if that's your definition, let's go with that for argument's sake, because we could talk about definitions of AGI till the cows come home. So just to talk about AGI for a moment, I think that in that respect, this is going to bring us closer. And when you combine this kind of thinking model, and I've seen the power of it, like looking at the way it thinks and things like that, you combine that with like agentic models, which are going to be forthcoming, the fact that AIs can now talk, and maybe in the not too distant future they can inhabit robot bodies that are half decent. I think that the progression towards doing tasks that humans do, and hence, coming back to one of the, core reasons for our podcast around jobs and whether humans will have jobs anymore in AI future, I think this is going to take us closer, and it's going to accelerate that journey, sadly. Because I'm not sure I'm particularly happy about like the way things are going. I think companies are already replacing a lot of jobs. Like Sam Altman's very bullish on the fact that coding is not going to be a job in the future, or it's going to be a senior programming engineer supervising a load of AIs, because AI is going to be able to do everything from mid-level coding all the way down, and you're just going to need someone to supervise it. And when I say supervise it, effectively giving it instructions and just double-checking things is what I mean. So I think increasingly we're going to see AI taking those kind of jobs. Just quickly to go on to ASI, there's been a few sort of developments recently in terms of like, and this kind of fits into that. The DeepSeek thing kind of fits into that. One of the things that DeepSeek have done is they've taken humans out of the loop completely. The reinforcement learning that they've done is all artificial. Everything is 100% artificial with this model. And so if you can keep doing that and iterating on that, potentially I can see a future where you can have models that can self-improve, and then obviously that very quickly becomes some kind of singularity, and you start heading towards artificial superintelligence. However, doubling down on stuff that we've said before on the podcast, I still haven't seen a single instance of large language models or other kinds of AI actually coming up by themselves with novel ideas and novel solutions to problems. All I see them doing is getting closer and closer to replicating their training data, the things that have been fed into them. So I might be wrong, and I'm not sure I'd be very happy if I'm wrong, but I feel like I'm not too scared of this stuff at the moment not too worried about this, because it feels like large language models are just getting better and better and better at approximating stuff that humans have already done. As opposed to, what was the example someone gave the other day? Like, if you gave an AI the training data up to the point where Einstein came up with, relativity, general relativity, special relativity, I don't feel like at the moment we're even heading towards AIs that could make that leap, that could like come up with something completely novel like that. I mean, obviously that Einstein was a genius, but like that's the thing that's missing for me, is AI coming up with something completely novel, not in its training data, that is like genuinely a leap. And I don't think this gets us close to it.
Yeah.
Closer.
I mean, I said to you this week, didn't I, that I think, getting to 100% of human intelligence with sort of 99.9%, or sort of a 0.01% error rate is possible, and seems like that's the path that we're on. But to get to 101% of human intelligence with a 0.00% error rate, that very last 1% or 0.01% is potentially the hardest bit, particularly in the current architecture of large language models, because they are based on that training data. And even if you say, well, they're going to create their own training data and train each other, but eventually you come back to the sort of beginning point is still human data that's been put in. That I sort of agree with you. I mean, I think AGI in that sort of definition, I think we'll be there pretty soon, to be honest, because it's just doing things as well as humans. Now, whether one thing can do all those things well combined is slightly different, but they've watered down the definition. So you plug a load of AIs together and they can probably do most things. There's then a question of whether people want that. I've said this before, is that I feel like AI is something that's being done to humanity, not something that they want. But there's a lot of things being done to humanity that we don't seem to have a say in. But that path seems to me kind of inevitable. But that last kind of step, and as long as you've got 0. Where I sort of slightly differ from you in terms of, I'm not more confident than you or optimistic. I'm certainly not optimistic about it. But in terms of jobs, that I think the 0.01% error rate means that you'll still have a lot more people in the loop, because people will accept errors from humans. When you see a autonomous vehicle that has one crash, or one plane crash, or one meltdown, or one mistake in a, stock and shares management system, whatever, that will be deemed unacceptable and will be proof that they don't work. So I think there's a bit of that. But in terms of the speed of how we're getting to something that is, almost on a level of intelligence and the reasoning, I mean, it seems sort of inevitable that we're going to get to highly, highly intelligent, very close, that can, replace lots and lots of tasks very, very soon. I think we should talk about, go on, you go on, and then let's talk about the US side.
Oh no, so I'm happy to talk about that now. The US side, in terms of like where that money's going, and the Project Stargate. We were going to go into that in a bit more detail. Yeah, because
it's a great contrast, isn't it? I mean, like you say, maybe the DeepSeek paper came out a week ago, so maybe it's not the same week. But what we've had this week with the inauguration, we've had all of these kind of tech CEOs sat in the front row with Trump. Sorry, CEOs, not COOs. CEOs sat in the front row with Trump, and you've seen this enormous announcement, 600 billion investment in massive data centers, like pure brute force. The idea that, all we need is just more and more compute, just stitch together more GPUs, as many as possible, and just keep training and training and training. And that's how we're going to break it. And it's not to say that's not going to make it better and more powerful, but what we've seen this week is something that's gone against that and done it for with a few, I think a few hundred GPUs at a fraction of the cost. And it seems incredible in this week that the US is taking that approach, or Silicon Valley, or whoever, OpenAI is taking that approach. I talk about Gary Marcus quite a lot. I've said I think he's a little bit too far down the path of or sort of his own sort of rabbit hole. But I do agree with a lot that he says, and he talks all the time about the fact that all this pursuit of large language models and the current architecture and more compute, this takes away from new innovation. And I absolutely think that what has happened with the chip restrictions, and I think Christy and Grace and me and you have all mentioned this on recent episodes about, pushing China to innovate, which, people like to say China just copies. Well, it doesn't. It does copy, but it does innovate a hell of a lot as well. And there is a complete misunderstanding of that in the West, how innovative China is, and how, this is forcing China to be more innovative. And you've seen that. Whereas on the other side, you see this massive investment, which, it could pay dividends. And I'm sure, Musk's massive supercomputer and the first one of these huge data centers under Stargate they're building in Texas will advance things. But it feels like throwing all of these huge amounts of money at the problem is taking away from the innovation side of it. And at some point, they're going to have to start generating money to pay that investment back. Musk was saying this week, he doesn't think the SoftBank money is even there. I think they were talking about 100 billion. He was saying they've only got 10 billion. Sam Altman says, no, they haven't. You're lying. But I mean, whatever. They're just like having a cockfight, aren't they? The two of them. Yeah. I mean, I'd be interested, like your thoughts on whether this is a good use of money. I think I know the answer. Or whether they're not barking at the wrong tree, but they're focusing on, like I say, brute force rather than new innovation.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things here. Like, is it a good idea that the US is investing a lot of money in AI? Sorry, not OpenAI, although Freudian slip because it is OpenAI. But is it a good idea for the US to invest a lot of money in AI? Almost certainly. I don't like what the number should be. I don't know. I think some of the money could be better spent on current issues in the US probably, and I think a lot of people in the US will probably be like, well, I think we've already seen that. Like a lot of people in the US are like, whoa, where's this $500 billion coming from? And
there's a lot of pushback on this. Should say as well, like a lot of who I've seen, a lot of Trump supporters really disappointed because you've got to remember a lot of the kind of core Trump supporters, a lot of evangelical Christians.
He's their savior, isn't he?
Exactly. He's and he is doing something that goes against, a lot of this, as we talked about in other episodes, and there'll be an episode coming out soon where we talk about let's say an alternative reality. But we've talked about, how AI doesn't necessarily kind of match with those people's values, and also it's their jobs and all this other stuff. So I think there's already a backlash actually against this investment. Like Trump has alienated quite a lot of his core with this decision actually.
Yeah. So I think that's obviously something that it's, I guess, aside from that, so if we take that off the sort of table for a moment, in terms of like from a business perspective, does it make sense to invest a lot of money in AI? Almost certainly. However, like the fact that the DeepSeek paper came out so close to this, it makes me think the money's just going in the wrong direction. It's like throwing more and more money at a very, very small amount of these like huge companies. Whereas clearly what's going on in China is you've got these companies no one's heard of that are just coming out with like world leading models and world leading algorithms and stuff like that. So is the money going to the right places when it's just keeps filling the pockets of these huge 3 or 4 or 5 big tech companies in America? And the whole model in America is where, like, if a company like DeepSeek came up with DeepSeek in America, they'd just be gobbled up by one of these big firms, right? Because that happens all the time. And maybe that'll happen in China as well. I'm not saying it won't. I did put this into Claude I put the DeepSeek paper in and I put the Stargate thing in, and I probably gave it a bit of a leading question, so I'm not saying there isn't any bias in this, but the answer Claude gave me was, in terms of arguments supporting it, it might create a bit of an infrastructure moat. Despite open source advances, running large AI models does require massive computing infrastructure, and even if as we said before, they take the DeepSeek approach, and then they feed that, and then they just, throw all this computing resource at it. You're going to get bigger and better models by doing that, because that is the nature of it, right? You can take DeepSeek's approach, but then plug it into your 10 data centers and get an even better model. So that's one argument for strategic control. Like, that's one I definitely agree with, where the US wants to have strategic control and wants to demonstrate that, and this is all part of that. But the arguments against, which is what I'm more interested in, because I'm quite aligned with some of this, like, significant breakthroughs are happening in the open source community. And interestingly, like, this distillation thing is something not to be missed. Like, one of the biggest breakthroughs is this distillation, which is talking about distilling large language models into smaller models, which could just massively permanently reduce infrastructure needs. Just to go back to what I was saying, just to make it like really clear, in a specific domain, I can run a model that runs pretty fast on my computer. I've got quite a nice computer, but my computer can run a 14 billion, maybe even a 20 billion parameter model. This is a 7 billion parameter model, so like half or a third that size. Most people could probably run this on their computer at home. And it's better than GPT-4 in specific domains, right? That's what that's talking about. GPT-4 using massive data centers, trillion parameter model, sitting in the cloud, costing a lot of money to run a query through it, was state of the art 6 months ago. I can now have a better model on my laptop in specific, like, with, as long as you put specific parameters around that. In terms of risk factors, so what Claude says here is, like, the infrastructure could just become obsolete if more efficient training methods emerge. Maybe we even find that we need a different type of GPU, all this kind of stuff. It feels like things are moving so quickly right now that what we're doing in the moment could just become obsolete very quickly. I think that is a big risk. Yeah, and just like putting so much money into traditional infrastructure might miss opportunities in new architecture and kind of force you down a path, create an over-reliance on current approaches to AI development. Again, that kind of comes back to how dynamic can the US really be if they're putting all their eggs in one basket like this. And I feel like that's what they're doing. They're putting all their eggs in, just basically in OpenAI, from what I can tell. I'm not sure where all this investment is going, but it feels like a lot of it's going towards OpenAI and their approach and their model and all the rest of it. And we're clearly seeing that, like, there are other approaches that might be better. And so what happens if there's an approach next month or next year where actually you need a different type of GPU, and we've just gone and spent 500 billion on building these data centers which are almost obsolete overnight? I think that could happen.
Yeah. So I want to go back to Alberto Romero, the guy I was talking about earlier. So there was a kind of just a sort of conversation, a comment that he'd made in a conversation where I think his view is that this is actually, like, DeepSeek and their CEO in particular, it's just like they're just something special. It's just their culture. So this is not, to be viewed as a kind of Chinese labs are more innovative. No, this is like the nature of this organization that basically, don't forget, pretty much just had some GPUs. So they just created DeepSeek to give them something to do as a side hustle. And they happened upon this, like, that incredible culture, which I guess goes back to, like, you're watching videos of, like, the beginning of OpenAI, and it's basically like Ilya, like, skating around the office, and it's just like a little room with about 5 people in it. It's like that kind of culture that allowed these things to happen. And now all of the big labs in the US are just structures with boards and interests from, government and everybody else, and venture capitalism and funding, et cetera, et cetera. And this organization's just like, they can just do what they want. And it's that unique culture that's allowed them to do this. And although that's out there now and everyone can kind of, use that model, but the next, I think the view from here, which I find really interesting, is like the next breakthrough is also going to be from some random startup, because they're the ones who are having to do things differently. and are not following the same path. Like no one in the US is thinking anything other, that I know of, or that's not to say no one in the US, no one in Silicon Valley of the big companies that we know of is doing anything other than trying to outcompete each other and find, minimal gains. It doesn't seem like. You've got someone here who wasn't even trying to develop a frontier model and has somehow managed to do it.
Yeah.
I wanted to finish off I want to finish off just sort of.
Sorry, I was just going to say, like, one of the other mad things that I heard, which it's just maybe completely unfounded and rumor, but obviously Meta do release Llama, and they were about to release Llama 4. This is the rumor is that they were about to release Llama 4, and they've just gone, whoa, and they're not going to release it. Because they've got to go back to the drawing board. When I say go back to the drawing board, that probably means copy DeepSeek's approach and then go and build Llama 4 off the back
and use
of
their
that.
model, exactly. And then do another run.
Yeah. Sorry, you were about to say.
No, I just wanted to finish off, and I'm giving him a lot of credit. I mean, this is becoming an Alberto Romero episode for me, but I've just been reading his stuff in the last week and find him like he's on a kind of another level. I don't necessarily want to believe what he wrote, but I think, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, we have been forecasting some of this stuff, but before the DeepSeek thing, I was reading something where he's got a kind of hypothesis with a lot of evidence behind it, but it's not, it is a hypothesis. And it was originally talking about Claude Sonnet 3.5 came out, and then everyone was waiting for Opus 3.5, and it never came out. And then Haiku 3.5 came out, which is crap, by the way. And then Sonnet 3.5 seemed to be updated. And then O1 has kind of come out. And O1 and then O3 we've seen. But where's GPT-5 and what's gone on with it? And the hypothesis is that OpenAI already have GPT-5. Anthropic already have Opus 3.5. And there is no incentive for them to release those models because they're not making any money. And it's clear now that the money, you're going to make from it is not going to be made from selling models, even in a commercial world. It's going to be from getting to the next level. So they're using these new frontier models that they have behind closed doors to train kind of smaller models, Sonnet 3.5 updated, O1, etc., and putting them out. And people are going, oh, wow, this is a massive upgrade. But actually, we're sort of thinking, oh, but it's not like, it's not GPT-5. It's just an advance, but it's really cool. But what we don't realize is that actually, the new frontier model is there, and it's just now going to be used to churn out, these models that are getting better and better progressively, not making huge differences. And in the background, the pursuit is, right, now we're on for the real big one. And we're trying to pursue, AGI or whatever the kind of whatever the next thing that you want is. And these models that are being put out to keep people happy, throw the dog a bone every couple of months with a slightly updated model does not reflect what's in the background. And that, to me, in a way, would make more sense of what's happened with DeepSeek, that actually, do they really care? DeepSeek's gone out, wow, it's shaken everything up. But actually, if they have these models in the background, maybe it's not that big a deal.
Maybe. I think it is a big deal because I think DeepSeek have demonstrated you can do this at 30 times cheaper, like 5% of the cost. I think that's one of the biggest things out of DeepSeek. I think it's democratized things. I think they're going to have to do something now. They're going to have to come up with better models and to release to the public, because otherwise, I mean, certainly at an enterprise level, anyone who's thinking about this at an enterprise level, do you want to pay, and this is literally reflected in the API costs for these models, do you want to pay OpenAI £1 per million, $1 per million tokens, or do you want to pay 5 cents to DeepSeek? Well, it's a no-brainer. And that's where the real money is in AI. Like these $10 billion, $100 billion companies, they're not going to make bank selling people $20 subscriptions to ChatGPT. That's not where they're going to make the money.
But do you think the board of OpenAI or Anthropic or whatever, maybe the boards that, it's not necessarily the investors, but the Sam Altman, yeah, and Dario, etc., etc.
I think he is the board, isn't he?
Do they want to make money, or is it their legacy that's important to them? Because if it's their legacy, then it's a different question.
That's a question.
You usually follow the money. I would always say you follow the money, but Yeah, I mean, you do usually follow the money, so maybe it is more simple than I'm making out.
As we said earlier on in this episode, like they've all basically become too big to fail now. They're the golden child of AI, for better or for worse. They're like the Bitcoin of the crypto world. There are better ones out there, but Bitcoin's still the king, right? I think I don't know if that analogy works very well, but if anyone follows crypto, they probably understand what I'm talking about. There are more efficient cryptocurrencies that run on much less money, that are cheaper, that have got better algorithms in them, but Bitcoin's number one because
there are better burgers than McDonald's. Is that a better example?
What are you talking about? What, like Burger King?
Yeah. What a way to end the episode. We'll finish off on that bombshell.
We did miss a piece of news, which I'm going to squeeze in 30 seconds. So OpenAI also released Operator.
Yes.
Go and check it out. I think it was crap. It doesn't really do anything. I don't know why they released it. Claude, I think Anthropic released something similar not that long ago.
2 months ago, yeah.
I think something like this in the future might be quite impressive. I kind of don't get it. Like, getting machines to control your mouse is just a really weird thing to do.
Okay, I've got to tell you, the article I read about it today compared it to, do you remember the search engine Ask Jeeves? So compared Operator to Ask Jeeves, and it wasn't actually about the technology, it was about the concept of like, and actually this comes back to what I was talking about having to get things 100% right, is what you can get it to do. You can go and get it to book your flights for you, right? Etc. Or to do some tasks. It's like, yeah, I could just book my flights myself, because when you think of like the instruction you need to give to tell it what to do to book your flights, like the difficult thing about booking flights is not pressing the button to book a flight and then it's already got your app on, you just click it twice, or your WeChat Pay and you show your face to it. The difficult thing is looking and deciding which flights you want. So a lot of this stuff of like taking control of your browser, I'm not saying that in future versions of it won't be able to do much more, but the idea at the moment, it can take control of your browser and make dinner reservations for you. When's the last time you made a dinner reservation? I haven't made a fucking dinner reservation in 15 years. I don't live in New York City, so maybe it's different. But, a lot of these things is like these tasks that it's going to make more efficient for us. This stuff to me is like back to the whole novelty, like crap that actually we're going to go, oh, that's really cool. And then realize, it's like Alexa or Siri or whatever. Like, it's got its uses, but this idea of like, oh, I'm going to get it to do this for me is like, well, I'm not, because I can just do it myself.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, for me, I mean, just to touch on this briefly, but like for me, the ultimate version of something like this in the future, like forget the browser or the interface, the ultimate version of something like this for me in the future, like what you want out of it is a personal assistant. Now, what would you do? How would you recruit a personal assistant? You would recruit somebody who's good at doing that job. Okay, given that AI models will probably be able to do that, then you would want to basically download your like preferences, your opinions, your like you'd want to fine tune a model on you. This is like what I think a good agent could look like, so that instead of having to like basically confirm everything, which is what you're talking about with Operator, right? Because basically what it does, it goes away, it clicks a few buttons and then goes, okay, do you want this flight or this flight? So the most difficult bit, which is actually deciding which flight to book and all that, like, is still on you.
Yeah.
The perfect version of your personal assistant is someone who just organizes your shit for you, and you can just trust them to get on with it. And I think that's where the disconnect is. Like, okay, maybe you tell it you want fish and chips, it knows your preferences, it can go and figure it out and sort you out. You tell it you want to travel to wherever you want to travel to, it knows your preferences, it has a good guess at what the most likely hotels you want to stay in are, what the flights are. Maybe it does a bit of narrowing down. So it's instead of just going, which one do you want? It like goes, here's a couple of choices that I think would be perfect for you. Like something that's a bit smarter than just like navigating a web browser, which, like, as you say, doesn't really solve anything.
Yeah. And it probably will get there. Again, this is like, it's the worst it's ever going to be, right? It's going to get better and better. So acknowledge that. But it just feels like at the moment, it's not something that interests me. It's like, yeah, wake me up in 2 years' time when it's ready to actually be used. In its kind of novelty phase, it is not useful. I'm not saying
you
that
not
it
feel
won't
like
be useful.
do you not feel like that's where these things are lacking though? Like what these companies are trying to do is like help you automate a process, but
They're
a
trying
lot
to
of the
solve a
example,
problem, Jimmy, that's not a problem. That's the
yeah,
thing for me is
yeah,
like when you approach a problem, what's the problem, and then you try and solve it. It's not a problem, right? Music is the same in a way. It's like creating music is not a problem that humanity has. Creating video is not a problem that humanity has. Creating nice images is not a problem humanity has, right? This is the thing with a lot of these things is the things that
it is
don't
if you're in
work or
graphic
not don't
design.
work, but that I think won't have that kind of life-changing thing is the
Impact,
things
yeah.
that are not solving a problem. When you solve a problem that is there that we need solving, that's different. These are, yeah, okay, for someone who can't make music, maybe it's fun for a bit, but it doesn't replace the act of creating music. And this is another thing, is like, is my biggest problem booking flights or booking dinner and stuff like that? No, it's not. Solve real problems. It's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's not doing anything that's fundamentally changing the world in a positive way. It's just making some stuff slightly easier for some people and then ruining a lot of other people's lives, at the same time. That's why I have an issue with it. And I hope, like a lot of this stuff, that a lot of it does get rejected.
Well, do you know what the
Anyway,
big problem? Do you know what the big problem all the biggest organizations in the world have? They have to employ people.
yeah, well, yeah, they're trying to wipe us out anyway, aren't they, mate? So whoever they is, you can decide for yourself.
What a way to end the episode. Sorry,
What a
this
way.
was like 50 minutes.
Well, it was fun though. It's some good stuff to talk about. So let's finish it off then. Thanks for listening, everyone. We've been away for a while, but we have got a few episodes coming out over the next few weeks. One where we look at military use of AI, second part of the Christy Loke interview, which will be coming out a few days after this one, and then an episode about let's call it an alternative reality, it was a fun one to do. Let's see if it's a fun one to listen to. So thanks for listening, everyone. Take care.
Cheers.